Let's talk about those plastic bricks that we all know and love. I'm Kate, and welcome to Adulting with Bricks. In this inaugural episode, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got into Lego, what my favorite sets were as a child, and just the general how this just became a general full circle moment for me in the last 2 years, getting back into those particular sets. So the first sets that I had were the original Spaceline sets. These came out starting in the late 70s and were actually out through the approximately the late 80s, early 90s. They are the little iconic spacemen that we know and love, with the blue and the shirt and the planet with the space on it. And for me, I got into those sets because my mom got me some as a child when I was about 5 or 6, thinking this would be a good way for me and my dad to bond. It wasn't, I was still into dance and those kind of girly things, and this was something that was a little more on his speed because he was more of a Mr. Fix-It kind of guy, and he liked to build a lot. And so she thought this would be a good thing that we could do together, because even then, most Lego sets, even for younger kids, were still trying to understand those picture graph kind of things were still a little bit difficult at times. And so I got my first sets. And the reason we started with space was because I had been watched the space launch in kindergarten, and had come home and said I was going to be an astronaut. And then when those launches resumed when I was in the 3rd grade, that was my thing. I was all into space all the time. It was what I talked about. Would beg to go watch shuttle launches, even though we were not close to Florida to go see them. That was like my holy grail moment that I was gonna have at some point in my life at the time, I thought. And so this was how I got introduced in. Was she bought some sets, my dad and I would put them together, probably a little bit more emphasis at the time on my dad than me, because I didn't really understand how to do them sometimes, but I like to take them apart and reconfigure into all kinds of craziness. I do remember that part. And so that sort of led me around to those. And then last year, my husband taught me to go into a toy show with him. And I went just to be the supportive wife, because shout out to Luna Figs. He does have his own toy channel. He talks a lot about Star Wars and Marvel and all the things that were cool in the 80s, Masters of the Universe, Ninja Turtles. And he talked me into going, and I was like, sure, I'll go down there with you, because this was out of town. It was in Atlanta, and he wanted someone to go. And while we were there, I will not lie, I got very, very bored at times. And finally we went into a room and they had some Lego sets. And I had already kind of dipped my toe back in at this point, and I was looking for more of the retro sets, like that were the iconic one that was the shuttle with the booster rockets. That has always been one that I kind of wanted, because I was more into the model type Lego versions as I got a little bit older. And that was the one I always wanted, but it was very expensive, and my parents were like, we are not buying you this at the time. So that has been and it's still on my grail list at some point, possibly, now. And so we went, and while we were in there we did find some of the retro space sets. And so I did pick up a couple, and this one is set 6824, the Space Dart. And ironically, with this set, and going back now, I'm pretty sure I had this set as a child, because I do remember building this piece here. And I remember the double-decker, these little satellite wing type things. I remember the double-decker, and this is one of the few, very, very few sets that had it, and it had a blue astronaut. And growing up, the blue astronaut was my favorite, and that was the one I wanted. Every blue astronaut set there was. I'm not a red person, even though I had quite a few reds and yellows and whites. It was blue for me. And then as we went on, I also found this one, which is set 6842, the small shuttlecraft. And so I picked those up and bought them. And that was also about the times Lego was doing their re-release last year of the retro space line, and bringing that back. And of course, Target, I think a couple of times even before that, because I actually had this beforehand, had re-released at least the plushes as part of their Lego design. And so I had already had the blue one, and I got the pink one. And then of course, at that same time, that was about the time right after Walmart and Lego had re-released the Galaxy Explorer. And it just so happened we found it on clearance one day, and my husband did, and he brought it home and said, "Here, surprise." And so that led to the Galaxy Explorer, which is set 100,497 and is based off the original set 497 from the same name. And by this point, we've also have now picked up multiple little extra Space Guys, including the 2 baby ones, which that one was already out with the brown astronaut. And of course the pink one came out, I believe, last year too, with the little astronaut nurse that it came out with. So we had picked up those. And then on Amazon, I happened to see that they had a Lego Space book. And this was the history of Lego Space from the 70s through 92. And so for Christmas, this was something I asked for Christmas, because I had already noticed in being over and babysitting my nieces that they were into Lego. Of course, they're more into Friends. But my mom had pulled out our old Legos for them because she still had them and kept them. So now I will say all of our old Lego is mixed in with this. So this has brought on a new project for me. But I started going through this book and marking the sets that I was pretty sure I had as a child. And so that started with this set, which is 4805, the Astro Dash. And set 4825, the Cosmic Comic rather. And then there was also a few other sets that I have noticed over that they had, which included set 6848, which is the Interplanetary Shuttle, which I remember this multiple piece set because at the time it was one of the biggest sets I had. And the other thing I remember distinctly about it is that satellite dish on there, as well as, shockingly enough, this little filing cabinet. So I do remember, I remembered those pieces. And then of course, I also had the Blacktron Invader at the time. And of course, last year they also brought out all those gift with purchases that were back to this retro line. And of course, as those came out, every time they brought one, yes, I found a big set to buy so that I could have them. So I have both the Micro Rocket, what they're calling the Blacktron Cruiser, which is the remake of the Invader at a smaller scale. The Micro Command, which is also a smaller version of a much bigger set. And then around the same time, we went to our first Bricks and Minifigs, and I found this set from 2014. Well, after I got those sets and started identifying, like I said, seeing that I still knew where some of those Lego pieces were, I wondered just how much of them I can find. So I've spent the last few weeks going through and trying to find the instructions and the parts list for those to see if I can actually rebuild any of these. And I just have finished that portion. And I have been over there once to go through some of the pieces, and I have been able to find parts to those old Legos, and I am in the process of going through to still see if I can find all the rest of those pieces. So stay tuned. That is a project I'm working on, and I hope to have an update to see if I can complete sets or if I have enough where I can source through all of the pieces to get there. But for me, this was my entry into the space, into Lego, and into the first realm of more of a different take on space, and not the literally NASA version that I was so akin to at the time. But the NASA is going to play a role coming down the road. So this has been the first edition of Adulting with Bricks. So let's see where my adventure goes. If you love Lego, then you're an adult, and you're adulting with bricks.